All right, everyone. I am excited to introduce my next guest, actor, producer, Vietnam veteran. He has been all over your TV screen, Lassie, Love Boat, MASH, and of course, keeping the California highways safe as Officer John Baker on Chips. Welcome to the show, Larry Wilcox. Hello.
Thank you.
Thank
Here
you.
I am.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
It was interesting reading your history and your background and how kind of leaving Vietnam kind of led right into with your family and being honorably discharged and going right into acting.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm going to make an assumption, but correct me if I'm wrong. In the they didn't have acting classes, I'm guessing, in
In
Vietnam.
in Wyoming or in Vietnam?
Yeah.
No. No, they didn't. But I did study acting before I went to Vietnam with a lady named Lois Hour in Beverly Hills. She got me into the film business and I studied with her for free for many, many, many months and she got me an agent. So that gave me a leg up. Then when I went to Vietnam, I came back and began studying again with her and other acting coaches.
Did being a veteran sort of point you in a particular direction in terms of the type of acting or roles that you wanted to go into?
No, I don't think so. I mean, sometimes going to war, you scribble outside the lines and you push the envelope on a bunch of different levels, emotionally and intellectually, and you push your fear quotient and, a lot of growing. On one hand, a lot of growing. Sometimes you think when you come back, you're a worldly figure, but in fact, you're just a midget. You really haven't been exposed at all to a lot of different things in the world. So to me, my life began after Vietnam. I really wanted to be a character actor, to be honest with you. I enjoyed playing different characters, and every chance I got, as anyone who knows my work sees it, I try to create these little characters in different roles that were written for either a leading man or a boring straight man. So I enjoyed the indulgence of acting as a young actor. It was fun, and I'm grateful and humbled.
I didn't realize this, but one of the joys of doing this podcast is sort of like I know you in a certain way, and then when you get to start to dive in, you're like, oh my god, you're right. These are
Yeah.
there's a lot of really cool things. One of your first, I guess, 1971. You're in the last two seasons of Lassie. You're
Right. Yeah. I'm the co-star.
right. The dog's the
Last, the
star, but
dog's
like,
the star. Yeah. But yeah, that was fun because, you wouldn't think of it that like 300 actors read for Lassie, right? And actors sometimes will take a bullet out of the narrative and leave out all the rest of the background to make it sound like 300 actors. You beat out 300 actors, right? Well, yeah, I did, but I don't think it was because of talent. I think it was because I looked a lot younger than I was. I looked like boy next door. I played like a 16-year-old kid, and I was probably 20, 21 then. And I was really polite. I grew up with English influenced parents, so my manners were maybe over the top and kind of an anachronistic perspective in terms of what you should and shouldn't say and how you stand when a lady enters the room and all those things that we were taught as kids. And I think that's what really got me the role. Notwithstanding, I was probably honest and believable, but you didn't have to be Marlon Brando to star in Lassie. So it was a great learning school for me because all the things that okay, I could do a scene pretty well. I knew about writing character background and I knew about, stage direction, stage left, camera right. But what I didn't know were things that you learn on the job training in film, and that was how to match. I would get off a horse, walk down to a stream, get my canteen, fill my canteen, take a swig of the canteen, all with 20 lines of dialogue. Now I have to match all that stuff. That means, did you say the fifth line or the 11th line when you're drinking the canteen? And when you were filling it up, was it the second line? You have to match all that. that was like, oh my goodness. So I learned that, and how to act when the dog trainer was saying, speak, Lassie, speak, right? And he's speaking on my lines. It's like, come on. So, you learn to accommodate a lot of little tricks. Do stunts. They had me do all the stunts. I didn't know any difference. I was a hick from Wyoming, right? And out of Vietnam. And so they said, would you mind jumping off the train when it's coming down about 30 miles an hour? You can go into the sand area. It won't be a big deal, Larry. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll jump off in the sand. So I jump off and roll along. And they asked me once, do you mind jumping in the rapids over here and rescuing Lassie while he's getting this rabbit or squirrel in his mouth? You know how to swim? Yeah. So just jump in there, and we have these frogmen string with a rope across the river down there. And then when you get to, it's going to really take you because the current's really fast. I said, I'm a pretty good swimmer. And so I jumped off, and I went past that rope in like 2 seconds, right? And then I had to fall through trap doors and hit a mattress. And I did literally all my stunts. Never got paid for any stunts, but I learned a lot. It was fun. It was a good time. And I got to fly in Lear jets, and people would come to the set and see us acting and ask for my autograph, and I'd write a paragraph instead of my name, right? So we learned a lot.
Well, you were excited. People asking for your autograph. It's
Right.
right. You were like, was I assume the Weatherwax family was Rudd still running the Lassie at that
Yes.
time?
Yes.
Okay.
Rudd was the trainer, and his son Bobby would be there once in a while. And Rudd, he was a drinking man. He enjoyed his alcohol, and he had fun. And sometimes I'd come to work early in the morning, 6 or 7, and there would be Rudd passed out on the hood of his car. Slept there all night. He was a good guy, funny and entertaining. And the cameraman, Robert Sparks, he came back in my career later on, but he was the director of photography on Lassie. And he also was director of photography on CHiPs.
Right. Well, they say he knew. He goes there. He's like, Larry will do his own stunts.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Don't pay him.
Just put him on the motorcycle. Everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah. He'll say 10-4 and jump off.
What was it like working with Lassie? Because you've worked with a lot of famous people, but Lassie's got to be right there at the top of that list.
Yeah. Lassie was great. There were 4 Lassies. They were all males because their collars were fuller, but they were referred to as Lassie. The dogs were really well trained. Rudd Weatherwax did a really good job, and he always had treats for them and be talking to them while you're trying to have this emotional scene about a dead rabbit or squirrel or something, right? It was fun. They would get on the Learjet, and once they were on, I could get on, right? And we would fly up to Lake Tahoe or wherever. I hadn't flown in Learjets before, so Hueys and choppers and landing zones is what I was used to. So it was fun, and we really had a good time. Everyone was very polite, and as new as a young actor, you're having all the great breakfasts and great lunches, and babied in your own chair, and people holding umbrellas over you so you don't get in the sun and mess up your makeup. All of a sudden you're treated like royalty, and you're not quite sure why you're treated like royalty. And I called my brother back in Wyoming, and Randy was his name, and Randy passed. But I said, Rands, this is Larry. I'm starring in a television series. He says, what are you starring in? I says, a television series called Lassie. He started laughing. He said, you're not starring in it, dude. The dog's the star, right? We had a good time, and I bought my little color TV set so I could see myself on TV. So the evolution of the actor, and from a nothing background to a combination of wonderful things, is interesting. And as long as you maintain that humility and that candor, realize that it's just a job, then you have a great time in this business.
That's awesome. So Jeff Miller, John Provost, and you. So you're
Yeah, Tommy Redding.
When you go to the conventions and stuff, is there a Lassie contingency? Like,
No.
people are like, no,
No.
They're like, it's all CHiPs. We are not.
Yeah, it's all CHiPs.
That stack of 8x10s is the same one since 1982.
Yeah, they aren't around if Lassie was on, right? Some of them are, I guess. And once in a while, there's, oh wow, you were on Lassie way back when, and yeah. So it's, but I don't get much requests for my pictures with Lassie, right? But I have them there in case they want them.
I saw some on the internet. There's some good
Yeah,
photos of you with Lassie.
yeah,
That would be the collector's item to have.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about chips, but before we get to that, I know there's a lot. You've done a lot. I need to focus on one thing in particular. I hope you
Mm,
don't mind. I'm a big fan of the Love Boat. I love the Love Boat. I've had Isaac Gopher and Doc on, so I love talking. And I know you took 2 trips on the Love Boat,
right.
and I want to talk. I'd like to spend the next well, we can spend the next 15, 20 minutes talking about the mustache that you had.
Okay.
I'm
That
kidding.
pony mustache.
I'm watching it. I'm like, that is the funniest thing about it. Like, you're a hippie. I'm okay. We're not going to talk 15 minutes. Don't worry. Don't tune out. We're not talking 15 minutes about his mustache. I just thought it was hilarious. That character you played. I mean, I don't mean to skip over the fact that you got to hook up with Catherine Bach, but let's focus on the mustache.
What do you want to know about it?
No, I'm okay. No, I'm
They
just
stuck
joking
it on every time.
around. I mean, did anyone think it looked real? I mean, was
Yep. No, no. Maybe the makeup person did. I don't know. He probably lost his job over that.
we're like, Larry, we need you to be a hippie, and then when we close after hours, we're filming a porno over here. You already
Yeah.
for it. Did you enjoy going on the Love Boat?
Yeah, it was fun because Aaron Spelling was always really generous, and he was generous with paying people a guest star to come, and then I would say, okay, I only want to do it if I can do this kind of role, a mensch or something thereof, right? And he would say, okay, you can do whatever you want, and so that's how those characters really came about. Directors were fine. The directors, I remember when I had those glasses and that greasy hair in that one episode with Catherine Bach, and the director said, "You just have no pride, do you? None." And I said, "Well, I'm having fun being a character." But the pay was good. People were always happy and nice on the show, and it was easy job, easy work.
Neither of those were you actually on the boat, or were those just
No,
soundstage episodes? Yeah,
yeah, soundstage.
that was when I learned that. That was like finding out. Spoiler alert: Santa Claus isn't real. It was like, what? You're not actually on the boat.
Yeah.
I mean, you were on like so many shows, like MASH.
MASH was a great show to be on, a much different kind of show because, these were sometimes I would go and I was over time really trained well. And so I would go to do a show and they don't want any trained actor there. Hotel was one, where I would try to talk about the scene and the subliminal suggestion and background and all this stuff actors like to talk about, right? They'd say, shut up, we just say these 3 or 4 things and go on. But MASH was the kind of play, if you will, like theater, that you would go and discuss all that with the other actors. And Radar and I would have these long actor discussions about subliminal suggestion and indirect action and all kinds of other stuff. And it was indulgent and fun as a young actor. And later on in life, you learn that first I would have fun doing that with actors always because it helps add complexity to a scene and layers, if you will. But the one thing that I did learn over time is, a director doesn't want to know all that BS. He doesn't have time for you to start talking about, subparagraph A and in the indirect suggestion of B, which means really C is like, shut up, go be an actor in the dressing room. So I didn't ever dress. I would, in very limited terms, discuss them with directors. Now, some directors are responsive to that, and they want you to have those discussions, but not many. MASH was one of those shows that we got off on being actors.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You also took a trip to Fantasy Island. You were everywhere, like everything I watched as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, I did guest stars on everything from Room 222 to Fantasy Island, Love Boat, you name it. MASH, all those shows. I even did one with Anthony Quinn, The Man in the City, I think it was the name of his television series. And, Anthony Quinn was like bigger than big in those days. It's like, wow, you're going to work with Anthony Quinn. It's the top of the top. It was fun. Television was good to me. Vic Morrow was another really good actor I worked with on a movie of the week for NBC or somebody. And Robert Day was a director, really good director, cameraman. Vic Morrow was, I used to talk to him about writing character Bibles and, how you write this thick Bible about your character because it's not in the script. So you got to create something. And he said he used to do that all the time as an actor. He didn't do it anymore. And I often wondered, if actors get bored with being actors, they feel like they can kind of do it themselves. And sometimes actors become caricatures of themselves. Like I felt like Ernest Borgnine. I worked with him on Dirty Dozen and Lee Marvin. And when you work with Ernest, sometimes he was almost a comedic character of himself. That's why I understand now why some producers and directors don't want to know an actor. Sometimes they think it takes away from the reality of the story. Those big stars, they had their own identity and brand for sure.
Yeah, maybe it's like a different type of typecasting that you fall into, where it's somebody maybe they for a long time, people only saw Henry Winkler as the Fonz, but it maybe sometimes I never thought about it. You just said it, but like Vincent Price comes to mind too. But like where there's a certain personality you just attribute with the particular actor, and so maybe
Yes.
that became their thing. So.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in a way, like one time we can talk about CHiPs whenever you want, but I one time said that it's probably the hardest role I ever had. Someone said, "What? What do you mean by that?" You said 10-4 and pull over, and what was hard about it, right? And I said, well, it was hard because it was really written in poor taste. It wasn't, they didn't write the character well, and they didn't write any depth to the character, and they didn't have any differentiators for the character. And so it was all about punch. So over time, you had to create a substantive character that people could relate to. And those are really subtle strings in a tapestry that didn't have a lot to offer. So I think what I started to say is the lucky part is, Erik Estrada is a really almost like Fonz. He's a known type of brand and character. And it's problematic because every time you see him, you can't really believe him in another role. You always see him as Punch. I think in my case, in some respects, I was lucky because, I wasn't really any one of those kind of definable characters. I just was in and out a bunch of different kind of characters.
Right. You just take off the tan gloves and the baton, and you're like, oh, look, it's Larry Wilcox.
Yeah.
That was interesting, right? Speaking of the gloves and the baton, so visually that was to set you apart as well from the other characters, but also it was based on the California Highway Patrol officer that character was based on, Robert Hayden.
Yeah.
So he was a consultant, and then also the Highway Patrol, California Highway Patrol, were I don't know how do you say authorize the show, or
they endorsed it and authorized it. Had tech advisors to consult to make sure we were being somewhat close to story.
How close were they to keep everything?
They were very close in terms of simple things like first of all, they were not close about the story because if you wrote the CHP story giving tickets, you wouldn't have a television series. They had to obviously elaborate and create things on jet skis and motorcycles and airplanes and parachutes, none of which any CHP officer was involved. And their hair wasn't as long as ours and so on, right? But in terms of technical things, how you ride a motorcycle, how you mount and dismount the motorcycle, how you approach the car, those kinds of technical things they were consulting, and they were good at that. And they helped us, the uniforms, the appearance, not doing wheelies on the motorcycles and stuff like that. They were good.
Lassie is 71, 73. CHiPs is 77. What was the audition process like to get? Did you beat out 300 people for this one too?
No, actually, I had done Hawaii 5-0, and I'd done a guest star on a movie with Farrah Fawcett, was my girlfriend, called The Great American Beauty Contest. That was her first movie. And the producer had seen me in that, and he cast me the year before in a television pilot called Aero Bureau, which was about two cops on helicopters, and Don Meredith, Dandy Don, the famous quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and Dandy Don and I were the stars of it, but it didn't sell. We did the pilot and it didn't sell. And then the next year, he called my agent, who was David Shapira, and he asked David that and Herbie Nanis, who was Stallone's manager, asked if they could get Larry Wilcox to star in this new television series called CHiPs. And they said, well, yeah, I getting hotter then, and my career was taking a move, and at least it had quite a bit of momentum. And then that's where you have to be careful because actors start thinking they're actors, right? So they sent me the script to read, and I read their script, and I said, no, I didn't want to do it. It's another dorky television series on cops, and there were too many television series about cops already, and why do another one, and blah, 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 blah. And like I always say, all good prostitutes, you just got to figure out what the price is. So they kept increasing my salary, and finally I said, okay, I'd do the pilot. And so I didn't have to read for it. And they chose me. And then they asked me to help choose the other guy and to read with other actors. Same thing with Miami Vice, by the way. They only had to read once and they chose me. And then in a long story short, had to read with all the actors, and then they finally switched. So sometimes you read for a role like Lassie, and you always had to read, not on guest stars. As a guest star on episodic television, they just call me up and offer me the role, right? But it's a lot different in really good roles, where you have to go and read against other actors. I'm used to reading. I mean, I did so many commercials, television commercials. That was really great practice because I probably did more commercials than anybody at that time. I would get 1 to 2 out of 10 readings. That's unheard of. And so sometimes I would do, 10, 20, 30 commercials. I'd only have to work 10, 20, 30 days a year and make 6 figures just from television commercials. So I got reading down really well. Like, there's a script and you learn the lines. That's number one. Number two is you know how everyone's going to read this scene. Most of these actors, not all, by the way, most of these actors haven't got to the level to add a different level of approach. So if you can change the approach just a little bit and come in, the director and producers find that intriguing, and sometimes, in many cases, you'll win because of that case. If I got a call back, I always called that a win, whether I got the role or not. Callback meant I was 1 to 2 horses in the race. That's a win to me. So that's how your mind has to think. So otherwise, actors get burnt out from being passed on. Yeah, I didn't get passed on a lot. Honestly, I did not get passed on hardly at all.
Sounds like you came into the industry just at the right time, like the Larry Wilcox moment.
Yeah.
I mean, because just by numbers, I mean, if 1971, you're doing Lassie, and CHiPs is 1977, but assuming you started 76, and it debuted, right? So 6 years in, you're just being handed roles. So it's amazing, right?
Yeah, and the good thing was I was in the golden age of television. So I mean, there were 3 channels: NBC, ABC, and CBS. That's it. So you were in someone's living room, every week. In CHiPs' case, and in guest star roles, I was the flavor of the month for a long time. And then, things, I don't know if things change because you either have to stay in television, which got really weird later on, where you don't read in front of the casting director and the producer and director, and you film yourself. And I don't know, it's lost its pizzazz. But I was lucky at the golden age of TV.
Right. So we're talking about 3 channels instead of 300,000 channels like they have now. And so you're riding high, huge, you're on cover of TV Guide. You got like little action figures. Like how much of that stuff do you have either out or in a box somewhere?
Well, I have a little bit of everything. Here's my collectible coins here, right? With John Baker sitting on the motorcycle, and then there's his badge. And then here's a bigger version of my badge that I take to all the Comic-Cons and all that stuff. So there's dolls and, all kinds of stuff that we have, cards, collectible cards. They can go to my website at larrywilcox.net and, buy something like this. And, or they can come to the Comic-Cons and the car shows. Car shows are even better because, you make more money in a car show when you do guest starring on a television show, a lot more. it's impressive the amount of money that you can make at these events. And it's almost like somebody, Miami Vice actor said once at a Comic-Con, "Hey, Larry, can you believe that we found this other nest in the tree to make more money called a Comic-Con, you know?" And I can't believe it. I didn't even know this market was out there. Somebody had to convince me to please come and do one. No, I don't want to do. That's embarrassing, you know. And they're very lucrative, and then I see Henry Winkler and all kinds of guys there all the time, you know.
Oh yeah, they're lucrative. You can look
Yeah,
behind me. Every one of those 8x10s represents me
yeah,
shelling out cash to meet someone for 15 seconds.
yeah. That's right.
I love every second of it. Yeah. Besides the stuff that maybe you sell on the website, do you have any do you have any personal favorite memorabilia from that time, like the TV guides or cover or like anything where it was just like, it was probably a
Yeah.
million things. I don't,
Yeah, I had the Lunchbox, the board game,
you have your own
uh,
action figure.
action figure. It looks like a Neanderthal man, but I have it.
It's the
Um,
best they could do at the time.
yes, exactly. And last couple weeks ago, by the way, Jeff, Eric and I were honored in Las Vegas at the Mattel show, the Diecast show, as the honorees, where they built a little car. That car sold for $150 each. And it was basically this little Chips car that they put a Chips insignia on, and we autographed them, and they sold them out in like an hour and a half.
Love it.
Yeah, it's funny how this memorabilia kind of keeps on, the gift just keeps on giving.
All right, so this was an interesting thing I read. John Baker was one of the first characters on television to be identified as a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah, I don't, I think people were, because I looked younger, they thought, oh, I went in the Marine Corps, I went to Vietnam. I always wanted to be in the Marines. My brother was in the Marines, and they train you real well for war. If you get through Marine Corps boot camp, you're no weakie. I mean, it's really hard. It makes the other branches of service look like cupcakes. Once we got through that, then we went to infantry training, and then they told me you qualified to go your IQ test and all that. You can go to officer candidate school. Yeah, I said, oh, good. You'll go to Quantico, Virginia, just sign this paperwork, and then you'll become a lieutenant. And I said, well, what does that entail? And they says that entails you signing this contract, which means after you graduate from officer candidate school, you spend another 6 years in the Marine Corps. No, I'm not doing that. I'm here for 3 and that's it, right? They said, okay, well, you're going to language school. You're the only Marine picked to go to language school. You speak a little French and studied a lot of French in school. So you'll go to Fort Ord with all the Army, and you'll take language and you'll learn. And I thought, that's great. I'm going to be in my dress blues in Paris with all those good looking women in Paris. What little did I know, no, you were going to be in Vietnam as an interpreter, idiot, not Paris, right? And not in dress blues. But yeah, I was in the Marine Corps, and then came back, and on Chips, I had them writers weren't really capable, but I had them try to write something in that referred to that. But, I always told them, they asked me sometimes what I like to do. I said, well, kind of an adrenal junkie, so I like to push the envelope. But they never really wrote anything good for John Baker. I mean, I did some rodeo because I'm a professional rodeo cowboy, and race cars. So they had some car scenes. Once they had Paunch singing and dancing and singing Celebration. And they had me, they said they wrote a script for me. And I said, well, what is that? And I got the script. It was square dancing. I'm not doing this. This is Dorky Dawn. I'm not doing this. Has ruined my career. Dorky Dawn, square dancing. Right? So I got sick that week. I didn't go to work. When you watch it today, I laugh every time because Erik Estrada and Robert Pine and the other actors, they had to do the square dancing, and they look like dorks of dorks.
Oh God. That is funny. That is really funny. Okay, without looking, look at me.
Yes.
What's your badge number?
8712.
Oh, I knew you'd know. I knew you'd know.
Yeah.
So when we talked earlier about the California Highway Patrol kind of overseeing stuff. I think the mental visual of you and Eric, John and Ponch is riding in pairs, but that's not a thing, or at least it wasn't really a real thing. But
Yeah.
they let it slide.
Right.
I thought that was funny because it was like to read that it was like, oh, that's I picture you guys always riding next to each
Yeah, yeah, the training officer. I was supposed to be Ponch's training officer, and he was a wild hand, so keeping him under my thumb, if you will.
You guys did your own stunts. I know Eric had quite a spill, but did you ever come in from the Lassie training? You did
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. No, I had a few wrecks. We went through I rode motorcycles previously as a kid and stuff. I really learned a lot. I had to go through the CHP training. I rode the police motorcycles, and they're big and heavy, and you got to look over your shoulder where you're going to turn. You never want to look down. You look down, you crash the motorcycle. So Eric and I got real cocky. We got really good on the motorcycles. So we did a lot, almost all of the riding, 90% of it. We didn't do the stunts on the motorcycles. When they had to wreck them and high side and catch on fire and all that stuff, we didn't do that. The stunts I did were on jet skis. I did all that stuff. And then on rodeos, I did all the horse stuff, right? And then fight scenes, no big deal. But any heavy stunt wrecking cars and going off ramps and no. But sometimes, when they first got the motorcycles, they didn't know how to tow them for the close-ups because they couldn't hold focus on two actors. So they put our back wheel on the ground and the front wheel up on a trailer. And that didn't work. And the first time we went around the corner shooting me, the back wheel doesn't move, and it pitched me when we went around a corner about 30 feet in the air. And I landed on my rubber gun, thank goodness, or it would have broke my pelvis. So those were mistakes that we learned. Sometimes they would choreograph traffic so it's all really kinky and hard to get in and out, and you got to brake and clutch and brake and clutch and once in a while you'd wreck and hit a car or something, but you're going slow enough, it isn't a big deal. It's always hard and embarrassing when you fall down on the motorcycle because it's hard to lift up. And he's like, dude, pick up the bike, come on, you're the star. We learned how to do all that, rock it up and so on. But so I had a few accidents. Eric, of course, had a near fatal accident.
That must have been extremely, I mean, not even just, I mean, just for everyone, especially Eric, but like that must have put a damper on the set.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because, any accident, we had several accidents. One time an airplane was flying low buzz-bys and the wheel and the strut, cameraman was inside a truck and he was supposed to buzz the truck and he hit the windshield with his wheel and the camera went into his eye and tore his retina and all kinds of stuff. So another time when Chip's reunion movie, we did a fight sequence and we went past the mark. You always, as stunts, go from A to B, and you don't go beyond unless you go and scout that area. And we went beyond and hit a low-hanging oak tree, took off the cameraman the back of his head. In Eric's case, this is another example of being really precise in practice, not unlike war, where you practice every single thing, putting your magazine in the dark, getting rid of a jam and a weapon and taking it apart in the dark and so on, right? Well, in Eric's case, they had practice where he would pull in kind of hot on the motorcycle and the camera truck would be in a certain place and the stunt truck would be in a certain place. Well, the stunt guy had to leave for some odd reason and they put a transportation guy in that and he put the truck at the wrong positions, according to Eric. I don't know. And so Eric came in and the truck wasn't where it's supposed to be. And he came in kind of hot, so he grabbed both brakes. In a motorcycle, you have to taper those brakes. You can't do them fast or hard. And if you do, it's a problem. And his bike went down. And then if you don't hold on to the brakes, what happens is the bike now comes back up. It's called high siding and bucks you off really hard and then follows you and hits you. And that's exactly what happened with Eric. So he hit the camera truck or the stunt car, and then the motorcycle smashed into his chest, broke his sternum, broke his ribs, punctured his lungs, and they thought ruptured his aorta. So then they, the first thing they called the ambulance, the medic on the set tried to, wasn't there, was coming. They banged on my motorhome. Hey, Larry, Eric just had a really bad accident. And so I ran out there and then it was kind of like my Vietnam experience. I I looked in his eyes and, always when death's arriving, one is there's a pain threshold that people don't understand. When the pain is really, really high, sometimes your willpower gives up. It's a funny decision that you have to coach yourself through the pain that no. And so I was his coach, if you will. And I'd see his eyes going and his lungs were filling up with fluid. He couldn't breathe. He was dying. First thing is treat for shock. And I did that and, yelled at him to pay attention and don't give up and screamed at him, keep your eyes on my eyes. And anyway, to make a long story short, then they finally extracted him, took him to the hospital, and then I came to the hospital, was in it with him in his room alone, and the priest came in and gave him last rites. They said he's going to die. We might be able to fly him to Houston for that famous heart surgeon, and back in those days when they didn't do heart surgeries, when they only did pigs. And we might be able to try to save him with that, but we don't think he can make that flight even. And so then they flew him to UCLA because we were out in nowhere land. Lo and behold, he survived like a miracle, and 6 or 7 weeks later, he came back, and now he was filled with all the tools that you need in legal cases. He had another accident on the chip set where he wrecked the motorcycle on the little piece of grass, and he kind of winked at me. And then he took him off in an ambulance. He was okay, but that was after the hospital. And then they sued MGM and NBC. That lawsuit, I had, I always, I'm pretty good at legal contracts and writing contracts. And for some reason, I have this, you'll show me a contract once, I pretty much can write it the next time in the same verbiage that you wrote it as an attorney. And so I had favored nations in my contract. And luckily, he got a new Rolls Royce. He sued him, and he got money, and I got a new Rolls Royce too, right? He got a white one with red interior, and next day I showed up with a black one, Corniche, with a tan top, convertible, and tan interior. So it was beneficial, but so after that, I think he ended up getting a percentage also of the show or something, maybe profit participation or something. I don't know, with MGM and NBC. So, yeah, he was very lucky to survive. And Bruce Jenner replaced him while he was in the hospital. And then when Erik came back, then they let Bruce Jenner go.
It sounds like you were like an angel for Erik. Like you were there right at the right time with the right kind of background and knowledge.
Yeah, I think it was good for him and good for me and good for both of our memories. And, I'm grateful that I was able to do that in some little way. Good for Erik.
Why did you end up leaving before the show ended its run?
Well, we did, I had flown to Brazil and they paid me a lot of money to do a personal appearance there. And I took some friends, 2 stunt guys that I used to hang out with, and my attorney, and we partied and had a good time in Rio de Janeiro and so on, right? We were the flavor of the month. 40,000 people met me at the airport, and John Baker, and kids on the highway were in a limousine lined in their little Chips uniforms. And McCann Erickson was their, they had 4 senior executives in different continents, and that was one location. So they really did a great job of advertising and marketing my appearances. Huge event. I got to be Elvis for a week or so. When I came back, my agent told me that I got really bad news for you. I said, what's that? And they said, they're not going to bring you back on Chips. I said, what? What do you mean? I mean, really? And I directed 2 of the highest rated shows, and I brought my own productions and made deals for NBC and MGM, all by myself, right? No uncle or anyone helped me. No cousin, no background, no church, no synagogue, nothing. I just went out and did it, right? Signed deals, got deals, brought them to my team players who weren't my team players. That's the sad part about the film business, right? And so I couldn't believe it. Later, I had lunch, much later. I didn't really understand how that took place, and they just decided not to bring you back as an actor. I hurried up with my public relations person, Rogers and Cowan, I think it was. Anyway, a big PR firm, and we did a newspaper release in LA Times, and I said I'm going to leave the show and have been there long enough, and I beat them to their punch because I knew it isn't going to look good saying that they got rid of me, right? That doesn't make your career look good. So I thought they did get rid of me. But later on, I had lunch with the executive producer, Cy Shermack, and he said, "No, are you kidding me? Erik had you fired. I was in that meeting." I said, "What? The guy saved his life and he had me fired?" And he said, "Yeah." He came in and his ultimatum was because he owned a percentage and he had sued MGM and sued NBC, take it or leave it. Either I leave or you get rid of the people that I tell you I don't want on the show anymore. So he had a laundry list of people that he had fired. I couldn't believe it. I just thought, wow, what a lowlife had me fired, right? And then to make full swing of that story is about 10 years, 15 years, long time later. I mean, I grew up in Wyoming where people that did stuff like that, you go around on the other side of the barn and settle it. And that's not a good way to do it, by the way. So I'm not bragging about that. That was a hick mentality that I had that's how I did things, right? And as a Marine, I did them all the time, right? That was my first go-to action. And I always felt that's how I'll do it in the future if I ever run into Erik. And then one time someone said, "Why don't you guys make up? And it's been so long and blah, 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 blah." And the more I thought about it, is, wow, have you grown any in your life? Are you still a punk from Wyoming? I mean, a cowboy walking around with a swag acting like you're tough? Well, why would you want to do that? And so I thought about it by myself, never had this really conversation with anyone other than myself. And I realized that I have to submit. It's kind of like when you love someone, you have to submit, you have to be vulnerable, you have to trust. And so I took the high road and said, I'm going to be his friend. And unequivocally, I don't have any items on a scorecard that he has to meet. I have to meet him. And so when I see him, I'm going to love on him and be his friend and defend him and let time honor me because he'll distrust me. And the distrust that we both had over time, that was the toxicity of the relationship. So I had to discard that, right? And that's what I did. And now we're like best friends. Like I picked up his cards the other day. We have these identity cards we have for CHiPs, right? And I got him a deal on them. Here's people buy these little identity cards, right? And so I went and got his done so he could get them at a good rate and had them done and delivered to him personally and so on, right? And I everything I do, I don't care anymore if he's the bigger star, the smaller star, the more appealing actor, the less appealing actor. I just want to love him as a person. And it healed everything. We really have a great relationship as a result of that. So that's how I left CHiPs.
That is thank you for sharing that with me. That was
Yeah.
wow. And I watched a Comic-Con, I think something Nickel City Comic-Con, anyway, Buffalo, just last
Hmm.
year it looked like it was. And it seemed like you two get along
Yeah.
great right now.
Yeah, we
I,
do.
yeah, I mean, it's a great
And it
lesson.
works. And excuse me for interrupting. And people wanted John and Ponch to be friends. They don't want them to be enemies or actors that are jealous. So we're friends and they enjoy it. They love it. And we always work better together at a Comic-Con than individually. But excuse me, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say it's a great lesson. It's like I've gone through a similar thing where there's a moment in time where you don't like someone to a real huge degree, and then you have to think to yourself, "Am I going to carry this for the next 30 years?" I mean, it's like, and you can kind of, if you can make peace, it's
Yeah.
always a good path. So,
Yeah.
okay, knowing what happened with the original run of CHiPs, so when they CHiPs 99 came around. You're like, all right, but I'm a captain.
Yeah, yeah. No, when CHiPs 99 came around, they said, hey, they're going to do a CHiPs reunion called CHiPs 99. And would you do it? I was kind of surprised because I was thinking, well, yeah, I guess if everyone's agreeing to me do it. So when I went there, they said, you're going to be the captain. But typical of the film business, you have to listen to what isn't said. So I said, I'm the captain. Does that mean I'm not on the motorcycle? I'm in a car? Yes, you're just a car cop now because captains don't ride motorcycles. I'm not doing it then. I said it in front of everyone, and they, whoa, what do you mean you're not doing it? So I'm not doing it. Well, why not? I said, because the motorcycle's the star. If I'm not on the motorcycle, then I'm just another car cop. And is Eric on the motorcycle? Yeah, well, I want to be on the motorcycle then. And so they, rewrote some scenes and I was on the motorcycle. So yeah, it was fun. We had a great time.
That's awesome. And then National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1, you and Erik Estrada, I think, reprised your roles. And then we're on 30 Rock, one of the greatest sitcoms ever, by the way.
Yeah.
Do you have any like particular guest stars from Chips? Because I feel like I've interviewed other people and they're like, my first show was Chips.
Yeah. Yeah. Michelle Pfeiffer.
I saw that one. I saw it,
Yeah.
Michelle.
But she was so young. She was like a little girl then, but she was a beautiful lady and is a beautiful lady. But no, not really. I mean, we had everyone from Broderick Crawford to Carl James, no, not James Brown, but the famous the famous football player, Jim Brown.
Jim Brown.
Jim Brown. And, we had from every walk of life, we had some star. It was fun. I was always grateful that they came on, but like when I went on a show, somebody else's show, it was always neat to meet all these stars that I worked with, and they were always kind and nice. And they were extremely complimentary with what I would bring to the role and so on. So I always felt like, I didn't bring baggage, I brought desserts.
And sometimes a really killer mustache. But,
That's right.
Okay, so I know you quickly mentioned you were almost Sonny Crockett, so that was cool. And then, but you had a Wilcox production, so you started actually kind of going on the I don't want to say other side of the camera. Me as a director, but like you start producing stuff like Dorothy Stratten with Jamie Lee Curtis and Robert Reed and Ray Bradbury Theater. So did you Flipper the movie? Thank you. Did you enjoy? Which side do you enjoy that, bringing stuff to life like that?
Yeah, I enjoyed. I enjoy acting if the role's good. I think intellectually, the producing and directing are more challenging, so I enjoy those a lot. Depending on what kind of television acting you've done or movie acting, really, after a while you get bored just sitting around and coming into saying your four lines and walking off the set. Producing and directing requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of health. So you better be in shape to do all those jobs. So the reason I started producing really was I directed two of the highest rated shows in the history of Chips. So that reinforced my ego that, okay, you've learned to master a medium shot, two over the shoulders, a close up, and you're out of there, right? So that's plumbing. You learn that. But then did you learn to add the layers and, the way you frame the shot to make suggestions and so on. And so I had fun doing that. And then producing, my attorney said, you really need to expand your career because unfortunately, acting has a shelf life often and it's ephemeral. So what are you going to do when you're done here, right? Well, I'm going back to school and be a doctor or a dentist, I thought, right? That was my ego talking. So he said, well, in the meantime, you better start doing some other things. So let's get your production company going. We'll negotiate some development deal with MGM. And so we did. And in 6 weeks, I made 6 deals. And so, I did the Dorothy Stratten story. I beat NBC and Playboy and everybody else out of MGM, out of getting that deal. I got it. And I got the contract signed with the private investigator. And then I took that to my network, which was NBC, and to my studio where I worked at MGM. And then MGM was trying to screw me out of my own deal. So we had to negotiate with them. It was ugly. Joe Katz was somebody's business affairs attorney there. And someone said, boy, he's an SOB. And they said, yeah, but he's our SOB. That was MGM saying that he's our SOB, right? So I had to deal with that. We won the rights and then we took it to them. And then we got investment tax credit back in those days. And then they tried to screw me out of the investment tax credit, but they couldn't. I had a good attorney, Martin Leeds. And then I went and I bought the rights to the Waco cult. And before anyone, I found the investigator in Australia and wired him $1,500 and hoped I was doing the right thing. It was kind of a gamble, but he sent me back the blueprints of everybody in the Waco building, right? And so I knew everybody's in, where their husband was, where their uncle lived, where children were or weren't there, you know. So I had everybody. And when I took it to NBC, they said, wow, how did you get all this information that fast? And really, what I am is a business guy, and I'll come to that in a second. That's really what I should have done in my life. And so NBC then went behind my back and went to get some of the lady. I got the ladies in prison, her rights also. I got a bunch of different people's rights. And they started writing the script when networks could then write their own scripts, and they went and did their own shitty little movie, right? Didn't do a very good job, unlike mine would have been. So then I had a good guy working for me named Mark Massari, and Mark Massari was a mentor in a lot of ways, and smart, well-spoken, good writer, quiet Italian guy, and he got me the Ray Bradbury Theater. He brought it to me, and then we produced that. We took that to HBO, and they bought it, but they didn't have enough money, so they could do half the funding, and then we had to go to Canada, which was a pain in the ass. And we went to Canada and got the rest of the money, and then all of a sudden you're a guest producer on your own show. But we went to Canada and Toronto and produced it, did it for 5 years, won all kinds of awards for excellence. And I directed openings and closings and some other stuff. It was kind of neat. I got Peter O'Toole and Jeff Goldblum and, good actors that other people couldn't have got that I got. And then about 5 years ago, I found out our Canadian partners, Atlantis Films, had sold the television series because in the end, they wanted the copyright so they could do distribution, which was a mistake on our part. And we finally said, yeah, okay, because we're really not distributors, we're producers, and we did it, and that was a mistake. And what they did is, again, the art of obfuscation by not telling the whole story. They can tell a truth in one line in the paragraph, but the rest is one big lie. Well, what's the one line they told you? They didn't tell us anything. But when I found out about it and I called them, I said, hey, it just says here you sold the rights to my television series. I own that. I developed it. I brought it to you. And you sold this stuff for $750 million or something. Well, Larry, we sold it, but maybe we had a bunch of stuff in our library, so it wasn't just that. And that's the first thing, because now you can't tell which cost $1 and which cost $1,000, right? That's how they play the game, right? And then the second thing, they sold it to Goldman Sachs, but they said they only sold their percentage. Well, they never informed me that they were selling my property. And the statute of limitations was gone then. So, I lost millions of dollars on that deal, but it's still showing on Amazon and whatever. You think I've got a residual? Not one, right? So I produced stuff without boring you with all this stuff. I did everything. Sometimes 10 years ago, I'd take my Canon 5D Mark III out, get my little digital lights, set up the microphone, shoot, direct, didn't act, but produce, edit, and do a presentation like to Discovery Channel, which I sent in, called Gold Diggers. It was a movie about girls that had a gold mine, and it was funny. I won't bore you with it. And sure enough, and I copyrighted it, and I own it, and I registered with the Writers Guild. I'm a Writers Guild, Directors Guild, and a Screen Actors Guild member, and sent it to them, and it looked like we were going to get a deal, and then nothing happened. And I told a buddy of mine down in Orange County, and 6 months later, I see this show called The Same Show as Mine, and that a book just came out, and theirs was based on a book. The friggin' book was a takeoff of my series, right? They didn't have this book out before. My buddy told them about it. They hurried up and published a book, self-published, of course. Who would the hell want to publish that thing? And so my attorney says, wait till they make money, and then we'll sue them. Of course, they got canceled after a few episodes. But having said that, it was all good learning curve. I learned how to do business. I learned about contracts. I learned about scams and scum. But like everything, sometimes you think I always say, find a solution. I tell my children, find a solution, quit whining. I always have to find a solution. Well, there's sometimes when you shouldn't find a solution. Like I'm a pilot too. I often think, sometimes you press the envelope finding a solution you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have flown in bad weather, or whatever, right? So there's a paradox about finding a solution, but in most cases, finding a solution is a good habit.
Wow. Well, I am sorry that all that happened, but do you have any new shows in your sights?
I do. So right now, and it's a huge funding deal. So I will have a bunch of projects. That's including and not limited, because I own a portion of a technology company called Ultra UVC Light, and we can do some miracle things with that product. So that's A. Pushing that aside, B is that I've written two scripts. One Vietnam War script that I'm really proud of. You would think that with Netflix and those things, I could be a showrunner with all my history of knowledge base and things I've done, but no. So I'm kind of like passe. So I now have to hire someone to do the job I know how to do, right? So getting a showrunner to do your show and then giving him a percentage is a pain in the bottom. But I'll do it, you know. So I have a script, two scripts done that I think will be pretty successful shows. And everyone that's read it says it's written really well, and they think so too. And then I have a bunch of technologies that I won't bore you with, but that are earth-shattering technologies that can help the planet and help mankind, and business deals that I really will enjoy doing. And then my legacy will be to give my children a leg up in life. So, I've swam upstream, yeah, most of my life, but I'm a pretty good swimmer, so look out, I'm coming, right? They'll have a motor in their boat.
That's amazing. I love it. Larry
Yeah.
Wilcox, you are awesome. Thank you for sharing all these
Yep.
stories. I'm excited to see how all these things unfold and how you save the planet, change the world make it a better place. And I know you'll rock it out. Thanks,
Thank
man.
you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.
10-4, over and out.
There you go.
All right.
Perfect.
All right. Bye.